Welcome to This Explainer. Look, if you've been watching our national sport with a skeptical eye lately, you will already know the truth. That recent World Cup exit against Erling Haaland's Norway, yeah, that wasn't just a bump in the road. Today, we're doing a deep dive into this. We're moving past that immediate emotional pain to diagnose the chronic disease that's been infecting Brazilian football. We're going to look at the hard data behind our brutal decline on the pitch and contrast it with this massive, explosive financial boom happening entirely off it.
If you think getting knocked out by Norway was just, a stroke of bad luck, we really need to zoom out. Look at this 2-decade streak of consistent, painful failures against European teams. Our last knockout victory against a European squad was all the way back in 2002. That was the year of our 5th title. Since then, it's just heartbreak. Eliminated by France in 2006, Holland in 2010, the absolute trauma of the 7-1 against Germany in 2014, Belgium in 2018, Croatia in 2022, and now the Norwegian hurricane and the round of 16 in 2026. Guys, this isn't a slump anymore. It is a deeply ingrained structural trend.
Which brings us to Section 1, O fim da mística Canarinho. We have to face the uncomfortable reality that our legendary yellow jersey has lost its weight, and we're seeing the complete Uruguayization of our football. And moving right along to Section 2, Gestão caótica e escândalos, because this decay starts way off the pitch. Seriously, just look at the stark contrast between our glorious history and the current reality. As a skeptical sports observer, you just can't ignore the sheer mismanagement happening from the top down. We've essentially traded our prestigious local leagues, where our homegrown stars actually stayed and played, for these incredibly confusing, overlapping calendars and an endless parade of executive scandals. It's totally chaotic, and honestly, it's no wonder fans are feeling completely alienated. They're tuning out of our domestic games and flipping the channel to watch well-organized European leagues instead. The grassroots game we loved is just losing its face value. That chaos leads us directly into Section 3, a fuga precoce talentis. Because of this structural decay, our local league has basically turned into a giant clearance rack for international buyers. We always celebrate the few who make it to the absolute top, right? Like, for every Vinny Jr. absolutely thriving in Europe, we tend to ignore the systemic failure going on behind the scenes. We are prematurely exporting dozens of young players the literal second they show any promise. And what happens to them? They just vanish. They get lost in secondary leagues across Europe and Asia, or they're stuck on the bench at minor clubs. This early talent drain severely hollows out our own club competitiveness, leaving our domestic product weaker and weaker every single year. But nature abhors a vacuum. While the quality of our domestic football plummets and frustrated fans pull away, there is one sector surrounding the game that is just exploding with cash. Let's get into Section 4, a febre bilionaria das bets. 507.3 million reais. Let that number sink in for a second. According to a study by Clavi, that is exactly how much money Brazilians poured into regularized sports betting platforms just during the early weeks of this 2026 World Cup. Over $500 million reais in a matter of weeks. That is absolutely wild. And this fever is spreading like wildfire. It wasn't just that overall participation spiked on days the national team played, jumping from 8.3 to 9.1% of the population, but the actual average amount squeezed out of each bettor shot up. Pre-Cup, the average daily bet was about 188 reais. By June 25th, it had climbed 24% to 235 reais. So people aren't just betting more frequently, they are throwing down significantly heavier amounts of cash as the tournament goes on. But here is what's truly alarming: the why behind it all. According to the NBIMA Investor Profile Study, this isn't just harmless entertainment anymore. A massive 39% of people are betting out of sheer financial desperation. They're treating these platforms like a quick fix to earn money out of need. Only 32% actually view it primarily as entertainment. When you stop and consider that 31% of the country doesn't even have an emergency savings fund, well, it exposes a highly vulnerable population that is essentially treating sports bets like a lottery ticket for survival. This toxic combination of financial vulnerability and incredibly aggressive marketing during matches has finally triggered a massive regulatory backlash. Section 5, O cerco à publicidade esportiva. So now, the Ministry of Justice's Consumer Protection Agency, Senecon, is stepping in. They're strictly investigating whether broadcasters are violating consumer protection laws by using predatory advertising tactics. They are specifically cracking down on 4 major prohibited practices: making promises of easy gains, minimizing the real financial risks of betting, stimulating impulsive behavior, and creating this dangerous illusion of control. That sneaky idea that if you just know enough about football stats, you literally can't lose. This investigation has zeroed in on some very specific broadcasts, notably on CazéTV, where 3 matches are currently under the microscope. First, during England versus Ghana, betting promotions were heavily pushed via QR codes right during hydration breaks. Then, during Argentina versus Austria, commentators themselves were pitching boosted odds, completely blurring the line between editorial content and gambling ads. Finally, during Uruguay versus Cape Verde, the marketing actively associated our deep national passion for football with the act of placing a bet. Authorities are arguing that this directly manipulates the viewer's emotional connection to the sport. Naturally, this has sparked a massive debate. On one side, we have legislators like Congresswoman Tabata Amaral. She called it immoral and absurd how much bets have distorted this cup, and she heavily criticized commentators for pushing highly improbable odds onto a vulnerable public. But then, on the other side, you have broadcasters like Casemiro defending the betting sponsorships. Their argument? These bets are basically the necessary financial engine keeping sports media and modern broadcasting alive today. Now, we're not taking sides here in this explainer, but this perfectly highlights the incredibly tense crossroads we're at right now between sports entertainment, economics, and ethics. So after digesting all of this data, we arrive at the bitter reckoning. Section 6. Qual o nosso futuro?
We're looking at a gutted domestic league treated like an export market, scandalous back-office management, a fading yellow jersey mystique, and a broadcasting ecosystem that's increasingly funded by our own fans' financial desperation. So we really have to ask ourselves a hard question. Are we still the homeland of boots, producing the beautiful game? Or have we merely become the homeland of bets? Something to really chew on. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.